drip by drip, like water wearing down stone. And every single time, Vanessa sat quietly beside him with that calm little smile. Not pushy, not rude, almost worse because of how careful she was. She'd say things like, "We just worry about you," or, "We want to make sure nobody takes advantage of you later." I couldn't explain it then, but every time she said those words, I felt smaller somehow, like they had already decided I was fragile, like my life was slowly becoming a problem they needed to manage. One afternoon, Michael came over while I was organizing old paperwork at the dining room table, tax forms, insurance papers, bank statements. He picked up one envelope and asked, "How much do you actually have saved up, Mom?" I froze. It was such a strange question, not because children never ask about finances, but because of the way he asked it, so directly, so comfortably. I laughed awkwardly and said, "Enough to get by." But he kept pushing. "No, seriously, you should let me look over everything, just in case, just in case." Those 3 words stayed with me all night. I remember lying awake staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above me. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator down the hall, and for the first time in my life, I felt nervous in my own home. I couldn't believe what I was feeling. This was my son, the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, the teenager who cried at his father's funeral, the young man I gave everything for. So why did every conversation suddenly feel like a negotiation? Weeks passed, and things became even stranger. Michael started asking questions about my will, about the house deed, about whether I'd considered adding his name to certain accounts for convenience. Convenience. That word became another knot in my stomach. And every time I hesitated, Vanessa would gently step in with that same careful voice. "Oh, Linda, he's only trying to help." Sometimes she'd touch my arm when she said it, soft enough to look caring, firm enough to make me question myself. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe this was normal. Maybe getting older meant surrendering parts of your independence little by little until everyone around you started treating your life like paperwork waiting to be organized. I didn't know anymore. But deep down, some quiet part of me had started paying attention. And one evening, after they left my house, I stood alone at the front window watching their car pull away from the curb. Michael never looked back at the house. Not once. That's when a thought crossed my mind that scared me more than anything else. What if my son wasn't visiting me because he missed me anymore? What if he was visiting because of what I had? And honestly, that was the night everything inside me began to change. When people hear stories like mine, they always imagine one big moment, one terrible argument, one cruel sentence, one day where everything suddenly falls apart. But that's not how it happened for me. No, it happened quietly, slowly, like watching cracks spread across a window you've looked through your whole life. My name is Linda. I'm 64 years old, widowed for almost 11 years now, and until recently, I believe my son Michael was the one person in this world who would never hurt me. I raised that boy by myself after my husband died from a heart attack. Michael was only 23 back then, still so young, still trying to figure out who he was. I worked double shifts at the hospital cafeteria just to keep the mortgage paid and food on the table. There were nights my feet hurt so badly I cried in the shower where nobody could hear me. But I never regretted it, not once. Because every sacrifice felt worth it when I looked at my son. And for years, we were close. Sunday dinners, long phone calls, little check-ins during the day. He used to stop by my house unannounced just to fix something small for me. A loose cabinet door, a flickering porch light. He'd kiss my forehead before leaving and say, "Don't worry about anything, Mom. I got you." Those words meant everything to me. Then he got married. And listen, I want to be fair here. I truly do. I never wanted to become one of those bitter mothers who blames the daughter-in-law for everything. When Michael introduced me to Vanessa, I welcomed her with open arms. She was polished, beautiful, soft-spoken, the kind of woman who always knew exactly what to say. At first, I thought she was wonderful for him, and maybe she was. But after the wedding, little things started changing, not enough to alarm me right away, just enough to leave a strange feeling sitting heavy in my chest after they left. The first time it happened, we were sitting in my kitchen drinking coffee. Michael glanced around the house and casually said, "You know, this place is probably worth a fortune now." I laughed a little and told him, "Not a fortune, just an old house." But Vanessa smiled over the rim of her coffee cup and said, "Still, in today's market, you'd be surprised what people would pay for property in neighborhoods like this." Something about the way she said it made me uncomfortable, not because of the words themselves, because of the timing. It wasn't a conversation about memories or family or how many Christmases we'd shared in this house. It was about value, numbers, assets. I remember standing at the sink later that night washing dishes and thinking to myself, why did that bother me so much? I told myself I was overreacting. People talk about money all the time. Still, after that day, the conversations kept happening, always casually, always wrapped in concern. "Mom, have you thought about downsizing?" "Linda, managing a house alone at your age must be stressful. You should really let Michael help you with your finances." Little comments, tiny suggestions. A few months earlier, if someone had told me I would one day feel uncomfortable sitting at my own kitchen table, I would have laughed in their face. That kitchen was my sanctuary. It was where I packed Michael's school lunches for 18 years, where I sat drinking coffee with my husband before cancer, hollowed him out piece by piece, where I cried quietly after the funeral because I didn't know how I was going to survive without him. Every inch of that house carried my fingerprints, my sacrifices, my life, and yet somehow, slowly, it stopped feeling like mine. It started with suggestions. That's what Michael called them. One Saturday morning, he came over with Vanessa carrying a folder tucked under his arm. I had just pulled an apple pie out of the oven, and the whole kitchen smelled like cinnamon and butter. For a second, when I saw my son standing there smiling, I thought maybe things were normal again. I wanted them to be normal so badly. But halfway through coffee, Michael slid the folder across the table toward me. Mom, Vanessa, and I were looking at some retirement communities nearby. I remember blinking at him. "Retirement communities?" He nodded quickly. "Not now, necessarily, just planning ahead." Planning ahead. There it was again, always planning my future for me. I gave a small laugh and said, "Michael, I'm 64, not 90. Vanessa smiled softly, calm as ever. "Oh, Linda, of course. You're still very independent." Still? That word hit me harder than she probably realized. Still independent. As if independence had become temporary, fragile, something already slipping away from me. I looked down at the folder. Glossy photos of condos, senior living brochures, smiling gray-haired couples holding wine glasses beside swimming pools. None of it felt like me. None of it felt like home. I thought to myself, when did my son start imagining a future that didn't include this house? The conversation got tense after that, not loud. That almost would have been easier. No, it was polite tension. The kind where everyone smiles while quietly cutting pieces out of your dignity. Michael leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Mom, this house is a lot for one person. The maintenance, the bills, the stairs." "I manage just fine," I told him. And I did. I still mowed my own lawn, paid my own bills, drove myself everywhere. But the more capable I insisted I was, the more they looked at me like I was being stubborn instead of truthful. Then Michael said something that made my stomach twist. "You don't need to be so defensive. We're trying to help you." Defensive. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Suddenly, protecting my own choices made me difficult. That night after they left, I sat alone in the kitchen long after the pie had gone cold. The clock above the stove ticked so loudly it felt like it was mocking me. Tick, tick, tick. I remember staring at the empty chair across from me where Michael had been sitting, and for the first time, I noticed how often Vanessa answered questions for him now, how often he looked at her before speaking, how quickly he dismissed my concerns whenever she was around. It felt like I was slowly disappearing from my own family. A few weeks later, things got worse. Michael started asking to help with my banking. At first, it sounded innocent enough. "Mom, online scams are everywhere now. You should really let me monitor your accounts. What if something happens to you unexpectedly?" Every conversation circled back to my money, every single one. Not my health, not whether I was lonely, not whether I was sleeping okay after losing my husband, just paperwork, accounts, property, assets. One afternoon, he came by unannounced while I was sorting mail at the table. He picked up my electricity bill and frowned. "You're paying too much for utilities." I laughed nervously. "Well, welcome to America." But he didn't laugh back. Instead, he sat down and started talking about consolidating my finances, simplifying things, putting his name on certain accounts in case of emergencies. I felt my chest tighten. There was something terrifying about how casual he sounded, as if access to my life had already become his right. I tried changing the subject, but Vanessa gently placed her hand over mine and said, "Linda, you have to understand. Michael worries about you constantly." I looked at her hand sitting on top of mine, perfect nails, soft perfume, a sympathetic smile that somehow made me feel even smaller. And suddenly, I realized something awful. They weren't asking anymore. They were positioning themselves, quietly, patiently, like people waiting for ownership papers to change hands. That realization broke something inside me, because this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about trust, about respect, about the horrible feeling that my son no longer saw me as his mother, but as a responsibility to manage. I stopped sleeping well after that. Some nights I'd walk through the house in the dark, touching the walls as I passed, the hallway, the old family photos, the chipped wooden railing Michael's father built with his own hands. I kept thinking, how can a home feel so full of memories and still feel so lonely? One evening, Michael called me while I was making dinner. He didn't ask how I was, didn't ask what I was cooking, didn't ask if I needed anything. The first thing he said was, "Have you thought any more about putting me on the accounts?" Just like that. No warmth, no pause. I stood there holding the phone while steam rose from the pot on the stove, and I felt this deep ache spread through my chest, because in that moment, I realized I wasn't just losing control over my finances. I was losing my son. And the worst part? I don't think he even knew it. That night, after we hung up, I sat quietly at the kitchen table with only the light above the stove glowing in the darkness. And for the very first time, I began wondering whether I needed to protect myself from my own child. After a while, I stopped arguing. Not because I agreed with them, and not because the hurt went away. I stopped arguing because I finally understood something painful. Every time I defended myself, Michael looked at me like I was proving his point, like my resistance was evidence that I couldn't be trusted to handle my own life anymore. So instead, I got quiet. And when a woman my age gets quiet, people make dangerous assumptions. They think silence means weakness. They think tears mean confusion. They think kindness means surrender. Michael and Vanessa thought I was overwhelmed, but the truth was, I was watching. I started noticing everything after that. The little glances between them whenever money came up. The way Vanessa casually wandered through my house, like she was mentally rearranging it already. The way Michael stopped asking permission before opening drawers or sorting through mail on the counter. One afternoon, I walked into the living room and found Vanessa holding an old photo album from my bookshelf, my wedding album. She smiled sweetly when she saw me standing there. "Oh, Linda, these are beautiful." But instead of talking about the pictures, she asked, "Have you ever thought about what would happen to all this if something happened unexpectedly?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All this, not your memories, not your life, all this, like my entire existence had slowly become an inventory list. That night, I sat alone in bed staring at the ceiling for hours. The house creaked softly around me, the way old houses do at night, pipes ticking, floorboards settling, familiar sounds that once comforted me, but now every room felt different, heavy. I thought to myself, how did I become a guest in the home I spent 40 years building? And somewhere between midnight and morning, something inside me hardened, not with anger, with clarity. Because deep down, I knew something Michael didn't understand yet. I may have been aging, but I was not helpless. A few days later, I pulled every important document out of the hallway cabinet. Bank statements, insurance papers, the deed to the house, my will, retirement accounts. I spread everything across the dining room table while sunlight poured through the curtains in thin golden lines. For a moment, my hands trembled, not from fear, from heartbreak, because no mother imagines she'll one day organize her life to protect herself from her own child. I remember picking up the deed to the house and tracing my late husband's name with my fingertips. Thomas Walker, the man who worked 32 years at the same steel plant to pay for this home, the man who missed vacations and drove old cars so we could give Michael a better life. I whispered, I won't let this be taken lightly. And that was the first real decision I made for myself in a long time. After that, I started moving carefully, quietly. I opened a new safe deposit box at a bank across town. I changed passwords Michael once helped me set up. I stopped leaving paperwork lying around the house. And then one Tuesday morning, I met with a lawyer. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not Michael, not Vanessa, no one. The lawyer's office was small and smelled faintly like coffee and old books. I remember sitting there clutching my purse so tightly my knuckles turned white. Part of me still felt guilty. Can you imagine that? Even then. I felt guilty for protecting myself. The lawyer was a kind older woman named Patricia, gray hair, gentle eyes, the kind of face that makes you feel safe enough to finally tell the truth. She listened quietly while I explained everything. The comments, the pressure, the constant questions about money. At one point, my voice cracked and I had to stop talking altogether. Patricia handed me a tissue and asked softly, Linda, do you feel intimidated by your son? That question shattered me because I had spent months trying not to admit it. I stared down at my hands and whispered, I think I'm starting to. Saying those words out loud made the situation real in a way I hadn't allowed before. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't overreacting. My instincts had been trying to protect me long before my heart was willing to listen. Over the next few weeks, I made decisions Michael never expected me to make. Careful decisions, legal decisions. I updated documents, adjusted beneficiaries, created protections around the house and my finances. Not to punish him, never that. Despite everything, he was still my son. I still loved him with the same heart that carried him for 9 months and stayed awake beside his childhood fevers. That love never disappears completely, but love changes when trust breaks. It becomes quieter, more cautious. And for the first time in my life, I realized something important. Loving someone does not mean handing them the power to destroy your peace. Meanwhile, Michael and Vanessa acted sweeter than ever. That was the strange part. The more prepared I became, the kinder they suddenly acted. Michael started calling more often. Vanessa brought over soup one evening when I mentioned having a cold. But by then, I had started hearing the difference between care and strategy. And once you hear it, you can never unhear it again. Then one evening, everything shifted. Michael came over unexpectedly while I was filing papers away in my bedroom. The moment he walked in, I saw his eyes move toward the locked file box sitting near the closet, and the expression on his face. I'll never forget it, because for the first time, my son looked nervous. The moment I saw that look on Michael's face, I knew. It was only a flicker, barely a second. But a mother notices these things, especially when she's spent her whole life studying the expressions of the child she raised. He tried to hide it quickly. "Mom," he said casually, nodding toward the locked file box near my closet. "What's all that?" I kept my voice calm. "Just paperwork." He stared a second too long before forcing a smile, and right there, standing in my own bedroom, I felt something inside me finally settle into place, because for months I had questioned myself, questioned my instincts, questioned whether grief and aging were making me paranoid. But that look told me everything. My son expected access, and realizing he no longer had it made him uncomfortable. That hurt more than I can explain, not because of the money, never because of the money. It was the realization that somewhere along the way, the relationship between mother and son had quietly turned into a struggle over control. A few days later, Michael invited himself over for dinner. Vanessa came too, carrying one of those expensive grocery store cakes with perfect frosting flowers on top. She placed it carefully on the counter like some kind of peace offering. The whole evening felt strange, too cheerful, too careful. Michael kept complimenting the house, talking about family legacy, asking questions about repairs and insurance policies. I answered politely, but inside, I felt exhausted, emotionally exhausted. You know, people think betrayal always arrives with shouting and slammed doors. Sometimes it arrives smiling at your dinner table. Halfway through the meal, Michael finally said it. "So, have you made any decisions about the accounts yet?" There it was, again, always circling back to the same thing. I put my fork down slowly and looked at him across the table. Really looked at him, the boy I once rocked to sleep during thunderstorms, the teenager whose basketball games I never missed even after 12-hour work shifts, the man I spent my entire life protecting. And suddenly I realized I had been mourning him long before this conversation ever happened. I took a slow breath and said quietly, "Actually, yes, I have." The room went still. Vanessa stopped smiling first. Michael leaned back slightly. "What do you mean?" My hands were steady now, steadier than they'd been in months. "I met with an attorney," I told him. "Everything's already been handled." Silence. Heavy silence. I couldn't believe how loud the clock sounded in that moment. Tick, tick, tick. Michael blinked at me like he didn't understand the words. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means my finances, the house, my legal documents, all of it has been secured and finalized according to my wishes." Vanessa spoke before he did. "Oh, Linda, we were only trying to help you." There was that sentence again, the same sentence that had haunted me for months, but this time, it didn't shake me, because I finally understood something important. Real help does not make you feel powerless. Real love does not pressure. Real care does not demand control. I looked at Michael and said softly, "I know you believe that." And for the first time since all of this began, I saw emotion crack through his composure, not anger at first, panic, then frustration. "Why would you do this without talking to me?" I stared at him in disbelief. Without talking to him? I thought to myself, when was the last time anyone truly talked to me instead of talking over me? My voice trembled a little when I answered, "Because somewhere along the way, Michael, I stopped feeling like your mother and started feeling like paperwork." The pain on his face hit me immediately, and despite everything, it still hurt me to hurt him. That's the terrible thing about being a mother. Even when your heart is breaking because of your child, part of you still wants to protect them from the sound of it cracking. Nobody spoke for a while after that. Vanessa looked down at her plate. Michael rubbed his hands together nervously, the way he used to when he was little and trying not to cry. And suddenly, I saw him clearly again. Not as a villain, not as a monster, just a flawed human being who slowly lost sight of where love ends and entitlement begins. That realization brought me peace in a strange way, because anger burns hot. But clarity? Clarity is quiet. I told him calmly, "You were so focused on preparing for my future that you forgot I'm still living my life right now." Tears filled his eyes then, real tears. And for one brief second, I saw my son again beneath all the pressure and influence and greed and fear. But some wounds don't disappear just because truth finally enters the room. That night, after they left, I walked slowly through the house, turning off lights one by one. The kitchen, the hallway, the living room. I paused beside the framed family photo near the staircase, the one from years ago when Michael was still young enough to hold my hand without embarrassment. We looked so happy in that picture, so certain of each other. I touched the frame gently and whispered, "I loved you enough to give you everything, except the right to take me apart." Then I stood at the front window and watched their car disappear into the darkness. This time, Michael did look back at the house. But by then, I think we both understood something painful. Sometimes love alone is not enough to keep a relationship alive, not when respect has quietly left the room first. And as I locked the front door that night, I realized something I wish more mothers understood before it's too late. There is strength in sacrifice, but there is also strength in finally choosing yourself, even when it breaks your heart to do it.